In the Galactic Transit Hub, where the air smelled faintly like burned hair and bureaucratic despair, two Zephyrians hovered in the corner, their elongated forms wrapped in shimmering cloaks that rippled like a politician's promises. "Earth," grumbled one, his voice a mix of disdain and congestion. "It's like a sandbox full of ants. Time to kick it over." His companion, whose expression was a perpetual scowl even by Zephyrian standards, nodded. "Let's make it rain," he cackled, literally. Zephyrians were known for their ability to control weather, and they intended to make Earth's skies as unpredictable as teenage relationships. Meanwhile, on Earth, in a cluttered meteorological lab that was more junkyard than workspace, Dr. Oswin Calder was staring at his monitors like they owed him money. "That's funny," he muttered, though his expression suggested he found it about as amusing as a tax audit. "These readings look like a cat walked across the keyboard." Captain Tegan Voss, leaning against the doorway with the casual menace of someone who'd seen too much and cared too little, raised an eyebrow. "Funny haha or funny we're all gonna die." "Somewhere in between," Calder replied, scratching his head through a mop of hair that seemed to defy gravity. "The patterns are just weird. Like the weather's got a hangover." "Hangover or not," Voss said, stepping into the room with the grace of a panther and the smell of cheap whiskey, "we've got bigger problems." "Bigger than Mother Nature playing roulette with our climate?" Calder asked, skepticism dripping from his tone like venom from a particularly sarcastic snake. Voss tossed a data pad onto Calder's desk, narrowly missing a precariously balanced tower of unwashed coffee mugs. "Satellite picked up some anomalies. Thought you might want to take a look before I sell it to the tabloids." Calder glanced at the data, then back at Voss. "You know, for once I'd like to have a day where the universe doesn't decide to play kickball with our planet." "Dream on, Doc," Voss replied with a grin that had seen better days. "Besides, where's the fun in that?" Calder sighed, pulling up the satellite images. "Let's see what we've got." "Ah, yes, a celestial game of what the hell is that? My favorite." The images showed swirling masses of clouds forming and dissipating with all the logic of a politician's promise, hinting at something beyond the usual chaos of Earth's atmosphere. "These aren't natural," Calder said, eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the data. "It's like someone's playing Weather God with a broken joystick." "Zephyrians," Voss muttered, the word coded in contempt. Calder looked up sharply, his interest piqued. "You think those weather-bending bastards are behind this?" Voss shrugged, a gesture that on anyone else would have been dismissive, but on her carried the weight of experience and a lifetime of bad decisions. "Wouldn't put it past them. They've had their eyes on Earth like it's the last slice of cake at a diet convention." "So what now?" Calder asked, pushing his glasses up his nose in a futile attempt to look like someone who had a plan. "Do we send a strongly worded email to their leader?" "I've got a better idea," Voss said, a wicked glint in her eyes. "We crash their little cloud party." "Great," Calder muttered, already regretting asking. "I'll make sure my will is up to date." Back at the transit hub, the Zephyrian duo was hard at work plotting Earth's downfall with the enthusiasm of kids in a candy store, only the candy was global catastrophe. "The humans won't know what hit them," one said, his glee a little too palpable. "Good," the other replied, adjusting his cloak with the precision of someone who always knew where their towel was. Nothing like a little planetary chaos to start the day. But unbeknownst to them, Calder and Voss were gearing up for their own version of Bring Your Doom to Work Day. With a plan as half-baked as a college student's midnight snack, they prepared to confront the Zephyrians head-on. It was, Calder thought wryly, like bringing a spork to a gunfight, but it was all they had. In the hangar the ship waited, a battered thing that looked like it had been rejected by every respectable space fleet in the galaxy. "This is it?" Calder asked, eyeing the vessel with the enthusiasm one reserves for unexpected dental work. "Yep," Voss replied, patting the hull affectionately. "The rust bucket." "She's got character." "Character, huh?" Calder said, stepping aboard and immediately regretting every life decision that had led him to this point. I suppose that's one way to describe a death trap. Voss laughed, a sound like gravel underfoot. Relax, Doc. She might not look like much, but she'll get us there in one piece. Probably. Comforting, Calder muttered, strapping himself in. And here I thought physics was the only thing keeping us alive. As the rust bucket lurched into action with a groan that sounded suspiciously like a death rattle, Calder couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. Not that he was going to admit it, of course. A lifetime of bad decisions had taught him that if you can't laugh at your impending doom, you might as well be dead already. The journey to the Zephyrian base was mercifully short, punctuated only by Calder's increasingly frantic attempts to decipher the mess of data streaming across his screen. Voss, for her part, navigated the rust bucket with the skill of someone who'd been playing chicken with death for far too long. I think I'm starting to see a pattern, Calder said finally, his voice tinged with the kind of relief one feels upon finding out they don't have a terminal illness, just a really bad flu. Good, Voss replied, eyes fixed on the horizon. Means we're not flying into this blind. Not entirely, at least, Calder conceded. The Zephyrians are definitely tweaking the weather. I just can't figure out why. Does it matter? Voss asked, sparing him a glance. They're screwing with Earth. That's reason enough to put a stop to it. Calder nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. But before he could voice his concerns, the rust bucket shuddered violently as they entered Zephyrian airspace. Well, here goes nothing, Voss muttered, fingers dancing across the controls with the precision of a concert pianist on a caffeine high. Calder clung to his seat as the ship careened toward the Zephyrian base, a sprawling complex that looked less like a strategic installation and more like an architectural accident. I guess subtlety's off the table then, he quipped, trying to ignore the way his stomach was doing somersaults. Subtlety's overrated, Voss shot back, a grin splitting her face. Besides, we're here to crash the party, remember. The rust bucket skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust and debris, depositing Calder and Voss onto the surface with all the grace of a drunken elephant. Lovely, Calder muttered, brushing himself off. I've always wanted to die in a heap of scrap metal. Save the sarcasm for the Zephyrians, Voss said, already striding toward the base with the swagger of someone who was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. After you, Calder said, following with a sense of impending doom that was almost comforting in its familiarity. Inside, the base was a labyrinth of sterile corridors and ominous lighting, the kind of place that screamed evil lair with every flickering bulb. Voss moved with the confidence of someone who'd been here before, though Calder suspected she was mostly just good at faking it. Any idea where we're going? Calder asked, voice low as they crept through the shadows. Not a clue, Voss admitted. But hey, how often do you get to wander around an alien base playing hide and seek with psychopaths? Can't argue with that, Calder replied, though he certainly wished he could. The Zephyrians, it seemed, were not expecting visitors, least of all the kind armed with nothing but a questionable plan and a bad attitude. Calder and Voss moved quickly, avoiding detection by sheer luck and the occasional poorly timed power failure. There, Calder whispered, pointing to a control room that seemed to be the heart of the operation. Looks promising, Voss agreed, and without further ado they stormed the room with all the finesse of a bull in a china shop. The Zephyrians inside barely had time to look surprised before Voss was upon them, her fists a blur of motion that left one alien sprawled on the floor, unconscious and drooling. Nice work, Calder said, eyeing the remaining Zephyrian with a mixture of fear and admiration. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Noted, Voss replied, grinning as she secured the room with a casual efficiency that belied the chaos. Calder approached the control panel, fingers dancing over the alien technology with the expertise of someone who'd spent far too long trying to make sense of things that didn't want to be made sense of. Let's see what these bastards are up to, he murmured, pulling up the data with a triumphant flourish. What he found was both terrifying and oddly comforting in its predictability. The Zephyrians were using Earth's weather as a test run, perfecting their techniques before moving on to bigger, more profitable ventures. "They're just practicing," Calder said, disbelief coloring his words. "Earth's their sandbox." "Not for long," Voss replied, a dangerous edge to her voice. "Let's give them a reason to find a new playground." Together, they worked to disrupt the Zephyrians' control, inputting commands and overrides with all the precision of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery in a moving vehicle. The alarms went off first, a shrill wail that echoed through the base, followed by the flickering of lights as systems began to overload. Calder and Voss exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that it was time to leave. "Well, that was fun," Calder said as they sprinted back to the rust bucket, the sound of chaos hot on their heels. "We're not out of the woods yet," Voss replied, launching the ship into the sky with a maneuver that made Calder's stomach lurch in protest. As they escaped the base, watching it implode in a spectacular display of fireworks and failure, Calder couldn't help but smile. "You know," he said, settling into his seat with a sigh, "maybe there's hope for us after all." Voss glanced over, her expression unreadable. "Yeah," she said finally. "Maybe." And with that they hurtled back toward Earth, ready to face whatever came next with the same irreverent determination that had gotten them this far. For better or worse, it was the human way. Back on Earth, the weather had gone from unpredictable to downright apocalyptic, like Mother Nature was off her meds and in the mood to break things. Hurricanes in Kansas, blizzards in Brazil, and a dust storm that covered most of Paris in a layer of grit thick enough to make even the most optimistic tourist question their life choices. Dr. Oswin Calder, meteorological wizard and reluctant adventurer, was back in his cluttered lab, staring at the data with the same expression a man might reserve for a particularly aggressive tax audit. "This is bad," he muttered, though that was like saying getting shot was inconvenient. "Understatement of the year," Voss replied, lounging in a chair that creaked ominously under her casual menace. "The Zephyrians are ramping things up. They've got Earth shaking in its boots, and our fearless leaders are too busy rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic to notice." Calder sighed, massaging his temples as if he could somehow squeeze out a solution. "We need help, more than just you and me." Voss arched an eyebrow. "You volunteering to play the role of Chicken Little?" "Someone's got to," Calder said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Much as I'd love to see how this all pans out from a beachfront property on Mars, I'm not keen on the whole watching Earth burn thing." "All right," Voss said, sitting up with a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Let's gather a team. We'll go full Ocean's 11 on their asses." "Ocean's 11," Calder echoed, incredulous. "We're up against weather-controlling aliens not robbing a casino." "Details," Voss waved him off. "Let's go see the brass. Maybe convince them to take their heads out of their collective asses long enough to see the storm clouds on the horizon." Calder nodded, though he had the sinking suspicion that convincing Earth's leaders to act would be like trying to explain quantum physics to a particularly stubborn doorstop. They made their way to the Earth Coalition headquarters, a sprawling complex that looked as if it had been designed by someone with a deep-seated hatred for aesthetics. Inside, the air was thick with bureaucracy and the faint scent of desperation. "Dr. Calder, Captain Voss." A harried aide greeted them with all the enthusiasm of a man condemned to life in a cubicle. "The council is ready to hear your concerns." "Concerns," Voss drawled, rolling her eyes. "Nice to know they've already written us off." They were ushered into a conference room where Earth's top brass sat in a semicircle of self-importance. The room was filled with old men in uniforms trying to look important and failing spectacularly. "Dr. Calder," one of them began, his voice that special blend of patronizing and dismissive. "We've reviewed your reports, but this seems like a lot of fuss over a few bad storms." Calder took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into shark-infested waters. With all due respect, it's not a few bad storms. The Zephyrians are manipulating our weather as a test. Today it's floods and hurricanes, tomorrow it could be something a hell of a lot more final. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of a particularly loud throat clearing. "And how, exactly, do you propose we handle this?" the councilman asked, with the air of a man humoring a lunatic. "Well," Voss said, leaning forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you could stop pretending this is a bad episode of a Weather Channel reality show and start treating it like the threat it is. Or feel free to prepare your sunscreen for the day when the Zephyrians decide a solar flare would look nice with Earth's skyline." "Captain Voss," another council member interrupted, "we require proof." "Something tangible." Calder let out a laugh, bitter as a cup of coffee left to stew in its own grinds. "Proof? You want proof? The proof is outside, wrecking havoc. But if you're too blind to see it because it's not wrapped in a neat little package with a bow, then maybe you're in the wrong line of work." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the kind that usually precedes someone being asked to leave with security escort. "We'll take it under advisement," the council head said finally, his words the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head. Calder and Voss exchanged a look, one that spoke volumes about their opinion of official channels and their effectiveness. "Looks like it's up to us then," Voss said once they were clear of the conference room, her tone as nonchalant as if she were contemplating what to have for dinner. "Looks that way," Calder agreed, though he felt about as ready to take on the Zephyrians as a hamster in a lion's den. They reconvened at Calder's lab, the screens filled with data that painted a grim picture of Earth's immediate future. "We need more firepower," Calder said, fingers flicking through the readouts. "Something that can counteract their control." "Well," Voss said, pacing the room with restless energy, "I know a few people who owe me favors, people who are good in a fight and even better at causing mayhem. We get them on our side and we'll at least have a fighting chance." Calder nodded, though he couldn't help but feel like they were assembling a band of misfits for a task that required an army. "Let's hope they come through. Otherwise, we might as well start learning to breathe underwater." "Optimism," Voss said with a smirk. "I like it." For the next few hours, Voss made calls and sent messages, tracking down old contacts who might be crazy enough to help. Each call was a mix of threats and cajoling, with Voss proving that diplomacy was less about polite conversation and more about having the right leverage. By the time dusk settled, they had a small team of individuals who were either brave, insane, or a potent mix of both. There was Max, a hacker with a penchant for bending the rules; Ilona, an engineer who could build a bomb out of toothpicks and chewing gum; and Felix, a pilot with a death wish and a ship to match. "This is the cavalry?" Calder asked, eyeing the ragtag group with a mixture of hope and despair. "It's what we've got," Voss replied, unapologetic as ever. "And trust me, they're the best at what they do, which is breaking things," Voss said, her grin wicked enough to make Calder reconsider this whole plan. They spent the next few hours planning, a chaotic symphony of strategies and contingencies that left Calder's head spinning. But for the first time since this whole mess started, he felt a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, and could easily be extinguished, but it was there. "All right," Voss said, clapping her hands together as the makeshift meeting drew to a close. "We hit them at dawn. Everyone knows their roles," nods all around. Calder couldn't help but feel like a general leading a charge on a battlefield, only the stakes were higher and the odds of success were lower than a snake's belly. As they dispersed to catch whatever sleep they could, Calder found himself staring out at the stormy sky, a reflection of the turmoil within. He thought of Earth, with its vibrant chaos and stubborn resilience, and hoped that it would be enough. Beside him, Voss stood silently, her presence a reassuring weight against the uncertainty that threatened to swallow them whole. "Do you think we'll make it?" Calder asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Voss considered the question, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Doesn't matter," she said finally. "We'll give them hell either way. And with that, they settled in for a night of restless sleep, knowing that come morning, they'd either save the world or die trying. Perhaps both. Morning came too soon, bringing with it a sense of urgency that was almost palpable. Calder and Voss met their team at the rendezvous point, a secluded clearing far from prying eyes and judgmental council members. "Here goes nothing," Calder said, his heart pounding in time with the distant rumble of thunder. "Nothing's what we'll be left with if we don't pull this off," Voss replied, her expression one of fierce determination. "Let's show those Zephyrian bastards what we're made of." And with that, they launched into the sky, their makeshift fleet a ragtag assortment of ships that seemed held together by hope and duct tape. As they hurtled toward the Zephyrian base, Calder couldn't shake the feeling that this was a terrible idea. But then, terrible ideas seemed to be the only kind he had these days. "Here we go," Voss said, her voice crackling over the comms. "Remember, stick to the plan and don't get dead." The base loomed into view, a sprawling mass of alien architecture that seemed to defy logic and common sense. It was a fortress, designed to repel invaders and withstand anything short of a direct hit from a star. "All right, team," Voss said, her voice steady as she issued commands. "We hit them hard, we hit them fast." No second chances. Calder gripped the controls, heart in his throat as they plunged into the fray. Explosions lit up the sky, a chaotic ballet of fire and debris that threatened to swallow them whole. "Glad you talked me into this," Calder muttered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own heartbeat. "I live to serve," Voss replied, her laughter a balm against the chaos. They dove deeper into the belly of the beast, weaving through enemy fire with a skill that was equal parts training and sheer luck. The Zephyrians might have the advantage in numbers and technology, but they had something those aliens didn't: desperation and the audacity to fight back even when the odds were against them. "Almost there," Calder said, his eyes flicking between the control panel and the swirling chaos outside. "Just a little further," Voss encouraged, her voice steady despite the tumult. They breached the inner defenses, a last, desperate push that left them battered but unbroken. Inside, the Zephyrians scrambled to regroup, their surprise at the human incursion palpable. "Time to make our mark," Voss said, her voice fierce and full of purpose. They fought with everything they had, a whirlwind of action and resolve that left the Zephyrians reeling. Calder couldn't help but marvel at the tenacity of his ragtag team, their resolve a testament to the indomitable human spirit. In the end, it wasn't just skill or luck that saw them through, but a sheer refusal to give in. They emerged victorious, if only barely, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. As they regrouped outside the smoking ruins of the base, Calder couldn't help but let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "We did it," he said, disbelief coloring his words. "Hell yeah, we did," Voss replied, a grin splitting her face. "Now let's get the hell out of here before they send reinforcements." They climbed back into their ships, a triumphant exodus from the battlefield that left Calder feeling strangely buoyant. For the first time in a long time, he felt like they might actually stand a chance. "Onward to the next adventure," Voss said as they soared into the sky, the sun rising to meet them. The morning after their half-baked victory over the Zephyrians, the team returned to Dr. Oswin Calder's lab, a monument to chaos and clutter. It looked like a hurricane had passed through, which, Calder mused, was oddly fitting given the circumstances. "Welcome to my little slice of hell," Calder muttered as he shuffled through stacks of data pads and unwashed coffee mugs. "And by hell, I mean a place where logic goes to die." "Homie," Max the hacker said, eyeing a suspiciously green sandwich on a workbench. "Is that thing gonna mutate and attack us?" "If we're lucky," Voss quipped, taking a seat and propping her boots up on a crate. "All right, folks, let's figure out how we're going to turn Earth's weather into a weapon." Ilona, the engineer with a penchant for explosives, snorted. "Because unpredictability is exactly what we need more of right now." Felix, their death-wishing pilot, leaned against a wall, arms crossed. "I dunno, I kind of enjoy not knowing whether the rain's gonna be acid or just, water." Focus, people, Calder said, slumping into his chair. We've got a handful of Iors before the Zephyrians decide we're more trouble than we're worth and send someone nastier after us. Assuming they don't already have, Max muttered. Calder ignored the comment, focusing instead on the data streaming across his screens. Earth's weather was a calamity wrapped in a catastrophe, but it was the one thing the Zephyrians couldn't entirely control. We need to leverage the chaos. Get Earth's atmosphere to do the heavy lifting. Ilona raised an eyebrow. So what? We make the planet fight for us. Exactly, Calder said, with the air of a man who'd finally found his misplaced set of keys. We disrupt their technology by amplifying Earth's natural unpredictability. It's the one thing they haven't accounted for. Right, Voss said, sarcasm dripping from her words. And how do you propose we do that? Ask nicely, Calder grimaced. We need to hijack their weather control tech, turn it against them. The problem is it's more advanced than we anticipated. Max rolled his eyes. Of course it is, because our luck isn't bad enough already. So, what's the plan? Ilona asked, folding her arms. We fly back there and ask if we can borrow their tech manual. I was thinking more along the lines of hacking their systems, Calder said, nodding towards Max. That's where you come in. Max looked about as thrilled as a cat at a dog convention. Great. No pressure or anything. Calder tapped a few keys, bringing up schematics of the Zephyrian tech they'd managed to glimpse during their raid. We need you to infiltrate their systems, find a way to tap into their weather modulation network. Easy peasy, Max said dryly. It's not like they've got alien-level encryption or anything. So, we've got a plan, Voss said, her tone deceptively casual. All we need now is a miracle, or a really good distraction, Felix added, looking far too eager for his own good. Calder sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, here's how it's going to go down. Max, you'd better channel your inner digital Houdini. Ilona, we need you to whip up something explosive enough to catch their attention. You know, Boom is my middle name, Ilona said, grinning. Probably should have guessed that, Calder muttered. And Felix, once things start going south, we're going to need you to fly us out of there faster than a politician dodging questions. Felix saluted, a mocking grin on his lips. Consider it done. They spent the better part of the day preparing, each team member focused on their respective tasks. Calder's lab buzzed with a tense energy, the kind that accompanies a gambler betting everything on a single roll of the dice. As dusk approached, they gathered one last time to go over the plan. Calder stood before them, feeling less like a scientist and more like a general leading a doomed charge. All right, everyone knows their part. Nods all around, even if a few carried the resigned air of people who knew they were about to do something colossally stupid. Just remember, Voss said, flashing them a wicked grin. We're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting because those damn aliens have the gall to think they can walk all over us. And because we've got nothing better to do on a Tuesday, Max added, earning a chuckle from the group. On that note, Calder said, taking a deep breath, let's go make some bad decisions. They took to the skies once more, their fleet ragged but resolute. The Zephyrian base loomed ahead, a gleaming testament to alien arrogance and superiority. Calder couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension, but he buried it beneath layers of grim determination. All right, Max, you're up, Calder said as they approached. Get in, get what we need, and get out. Simple as a politician's promise, Max replied, fingers dancing over his keyboard. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching out as Max worked his magic. The tension was palpable, a living thing that wound tighter with every moment that passed. Then, with a triumphant grin, Max leaned back. I'm in. Time to teach these bastards a lesson in chaos. Ilona, Calder said, nodding to the engineer. Light them up. With a gleam of mischief in her eyes, Ilona activated her makeshift explosives, sending a series of controlled blasts rippling through the base's defenses. Consider them distracted. All right, folks, Voss said, her voice the calm in the storm. Let's make some noise. They dove into the fray, a whirlwind of action as they capitalized on the chaos they'd sown. Max worked furiously to redirect the weather modulation, while Ilona and Felix kept their enemies occupied. Calder, for his part, felt like a conductor of an orchestra that was one wrong note away from disaster. The plan, precarious at best, teetered on the brink of success and failure with each passing second. "Come on, you overgrown circuits," Max muttered as he worked. "Play ball, will ya?" The atmosphere outside began to shift, the weather responding to the manipulation with a vengeance. Storm clouds rolled in, their fury a testament to Earth's resilience and wrath. "Ha!" Max crowed, triumph in his voice. "Got it. Let's see how they like a dose of their own medicine." The Zephyrian technology faltered, their control over the weather slipping through their fingers like sand. Calder couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that their success was as fragile as spun glass. "All right, team," Voss said, her tone laced with urgency. "Time to make our exit before things get really ugly." Felix whooped, guiding their ship through the chaos with a daredevil's flair. "Hold on tight, folks. This ride's about to get bumpy." They careened through the melee, a mad dash for freedom that left Calder clinging to his seat and praying to whatever deities might be listening. As they broke free of the Zephyrian defenses, the storm they'd unleashed raged behind them, a fitting backdrop to their narrow escape. "Well, that was fun," Voss said, a wicked grin plastered across her face. "I don't know about you guys, but I could use a drink." "Make mine a double," Ilona said, laughter in her voice. Calder, heart still pounding, let out a shaky breath. "We did it, we actually did it." "For now," Max said, his voice cautious. "I don't think they're going to take this lying down. But at least we've bought ourselves some time," Felix said, even as he piloted them back to safety. And given them one hell of a black eye. As they made their way back to Earth, Calder allowed himself a moment of relief. They'd faced impossible odds and come out the other side, not unscathed, but alive and kicking. The battle was far from over, but for the first time he felt like they might actually have a fighting chance. "All right, team," Calder said, addressing the group. "Let's get back and regroup. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." "Sounds like a plan," Voss agreed, her voice steady and confident. "But first, we're going to celebrate the fact that we're not dead. Yet." As they headed towards the relative safety of Calder's lab, the storm they'd unleashed still raged behind them, a reminder of the formidable force they'd managed to harness. "Here's to Earth," Calder said as they touched down, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "The planet that refuses to go quietly." They disembarked, elated but weary, the weight of their recent victory mingling with the anticipation of battles yet to come. "Let's just hope we can keep this momentum going," Max said, already thinking several steps ahead. "We will," Voss said, her confidence infectious. After all, there's nothing like the threat of extermination to get the creative juices flowing. As they made their way back into the lab, Calder couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They'd faced the darkness and emerged with a glimmer of light, however tenuous. "Back to the drawing board?" Ilona asked, already surveying their equipment with a critical eye. "Back to the drawing board," Calder confirmed, the weight of their mission settling comfortably on his shoulders. But for now, they'd take their small victory and savor it, even as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, both metaphorically and literally. "Cheers to survival," Felix said, raising an imaginary glass. "Cheers to survival," Calder echoed, a wry smile on his face. They'd made their mark and lived to tell the tale. The battle was far from over, but they'd fight tooth and nail to ensure it ended in their favor. And with that, they settled in for a well-earned, albeit brief, respite before the next storm hit. The weather outside was the kind of miserable that might inspire an entire genre of depressing music. Sheets of rain lashed against Calder's lab windows, driven by winds that could probably knock over a small moon. Inside, the team gathered, each looking as if they'd just crawled out of a different layer of hell. Calder peered at his data pad, which currently displayed enough apocalyptic weather readings to make Noah start thinking about boat building again. "Well, gang, It looks like the Zephyrians have turned the dial from mildly inconvenient to world-ending sh*t show. Voss leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, the picture of casual indifference. And here I thought it was just another Tuesday. Is it just me, or are they getting better at this? Max asked, tapping away at his keyboard. He wore the expression of someone who'd been asked to solve a Sudoku puzzle with a gun to his head. They're really starting to ruin my whole savor the chaos vibe. Your vibe is the least of our worries, Ilona said, her fingers twitching like they were itching to blow something up. We need to figure out how to punch them back harder than a boxing match on fast forward. Felix, what's the status on the ship? Calder asked, hoping for good news in the middle of a cosmic bad joke. She's holding together, barely, Felix replied, his face a study in cheerful fatalism. Kind of like my last relationship. But she's ready to fly when we need her. Great, Calder muttered, his sarcasm as thick as the tension in the room. Just what we need. A ship held together by optimism and duct tape. Another gust of wind howled past the lab, rattling the windows like an overzealous poltergeist. Calder glanced at the team, their faces lit by the flickering screens and the occasional flash of lightning. All right, we need to find a way to exploit a vulnerability in the Zephyrian tech. But first, let's recap what we know. Voss rolled her eyes. That's easy. We know jack squat and we're screwed 6 ways from Sunday. Ilona's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Actually, we did get something from that raid. Those readings showed a weird energy fluctuation in their modulation network. Calder perked up like a hound catching a scent. And you think that's a potential weak spot? Or a trap, Max added, ever the optimistic ray of sunshine. But hey, when has that ever stopped us? Never, Calder said, injecting some levity into his voice. That's the spirit. Charge blindly into the unknown because the known is just as terrible. They looked over the schematics once more, their focus sharpened by the dire situation outside. The Zephyrians, it seemed, were hell-bent on making Earth's climate as palatable as a hot sauce smoothie. Calder drummed his fingers on the desk, feeling the weight of impending doom like an old friend. If we can hack into their system again and take advantage of that fluctuation, Calder began, his mind racing. You're thinking we can disrupt their control, Voss concluded, her eyes gleaming with a hint of mischief. Turn their own fancy tech against them. That's the plan, Calder said, nodding. Max, you'll need to work your magic again. This time, let's aim for something more spectacular than a fireworks finale. Max smirked, the challenge lighting up his features. I always did love a good encore. Ilona's hands were already a blur, tinkering with her arsenal of homemade explosives. And when you're ready, I'll provide the grand distraction. Nothing says look over here like a few strategic booms. Felix, looking as if he had a death wish masquerading as a plan, grinned. And I'll be ready to pull off a getaway that would make a bank robber blush. As if to punctuate their resolve, another bolt of lightning struck nearby, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Calder felt a surge of determination. They'd been written off before, by luck, by fate, by their own doubts, but like cockroaches after a nuke, they just kept coming back. All right, Calder said, feeling like a coach before the underdog team took the field. Let's get to work. And remember, we're doing this not because it's easy, but because it's the most reckless thing we can do. Voss chuckled, her eyes twinkling with a dangerous gleam. Wouldn't have it any other way. The storm outside raged on, a fitting mirror to the chaos Calder and his team were about to unleash. They were betting everything on this, on each other, on a chance that might not even exist. But when the options were slim to none, slim seemed like a fine choice. Hours ticked by, the lab a hive of frenetic energy and grim determination. Max hunched over his console, fingers flying with the kind of focus that came from knowing failure wasn't an option. Ilona calibrated her devices with the care of a surgeon prepping for a high-stakes operation. Felix ran final checks on the ship, a whistling tune the only sign of his nerves. Voss, ever the eye of their storm, watched the proceedings with a hawk's gaze. Let's move, people. The weather's not gonna wait for us to get our SH*T together. Finally, Calder straightened, his mind buzzing with plans and contingencies. All right, team, once more onto the breach. They boarded the ship, the whine of its engines rising to meet the storm's howl. Calder felt the familiar lurch of takeoff, a sensation that was starting to feel like coming home. As they soared into the turbulent skies, he couldn't help but reflect on the madness of it all. "Remind me why we're doing this again," Max joked as he strapped in. "Because we're idiots," Ilona replied, a smile in her voice. "With nothing better to do. And because," Calder added, glancing at his team with something akin to pride, "we're the only idiots willing to try." Their approach to the Zephyrian base was a heart-pounding symphony of tension and anticipation. Every sensor on the ship was primed for trouble, every eye on the lookout for an ambush. But the Zephyrians seemed to be preoccupied with their own machinations, unaware of the human-sized thorn about to lodge itself in their side. "Max," Calder said, his voice as steady as he could manage. "It's showtime." Max cracked his knuckles, diving into the digital fray with the fervor of a gladiator entering the arena. "I'm on it. Let's see how these aliens like a taste of human ingenuity." The seconds stretched, each one carrying the promise of victory or the certainty of failure. Then Max let out a triumphant shout. "Got it! Their systems are open like a cheap book." "Ilona," Calder prompted, adrenaline spiking with the urgency of a caffeine overdose. With the precision of a maestro, Ilona activated her explosives, the resulting explosions lighting up the Zephyrian defenses like a cosmic Christmas tree. "That's our cue," she said, satisfaction in every syllable. Voss didn't need to be told twice. "Felix, get us out of here, and make it flashy." Felix grinned, the kind of grin that suggested a complete disregard for personal safety. "Hold on to your lunches, folks." They rocketed away from the base, the ship's engines screaming their defiance to the storm they left behind. Calder's heart pounded in time with the ship's rapid escape, his mind a whirl of relief and disbelief. As they cleared the danger zone, the storm's fury reached a crescendo. Lightning split the sky, thunder roared, and the Zephyrian base was left in their wake, a testament to the chaos they'd sown. "Well," Max said, leaning back with a satisfied sigh, "that went better than expected." "Define better," Ilona retorted, still riding the high of a mission accomplished. "Hey, we're alive, aren't we?" Felix pointed out, his piloting as reckless as his grin. Calder couldn't help but smile, the tension in his chest easing for the first time in what felt like forever. "And more importantly, we left them something to remember us by." Voss nodded, her expression a mix of satisfaction and determination. "We'll regroup, see what kind of ruckus we managed to stir up." As they made their way back to the relative safety of Earth's atmosphere, Calder allowed himself a moment to breathe. They'd done it again, against the odds, against reason. And while the battle was far from over, they'd made their mark. "Back to the lab," Calder said, already thinking of their next steps. "We've got more work to do." "Back to the lab," came the chorus, each voice tinged with a blend of humor and resolve. The storm outside might have been beyond their control, but inside they were the masters of their fate, misfit heroes in a chaotic universe. And as long as they had each other, they had a fighting chance. As they touched down, the weight of what they'd achieved settled over them like a shared secret. Calder stepped out, feeling the rain on his face as a reminder of what they were up against, and why they wouldn't back down. "Let's get to work, people," he said, his voice carrying the promise of battle yet to come. "After all, there's a planet counting on us to be the biggest thorns in the universe's side." And with that, they returned to their sanctuary of clutter and chaos, ready to face whatever new storm the cosmos could conjure. The storm was dying down outside Calder's lab, but inside, the storm of emotions was just ramping up. Hope had done a swan dive off a cliff and taken common sense with it. Calder surveyed his team, a motley crew of cynics and misfits who had somehow become Earth's last line of defense against the Zephyrians. Lucky planet. Okay, team, Calder started, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We've done the impossible before. Any ideas on how we can do it again? Max looked up from his console, his face etched with stress lines deep enough to lose a credit chip. Honestly, boss, we're running on fumes here. I can barely keep the systems from crashing, let alone hack alien tech again. Not to mention, Ilona added, polishing a piece of her personal armory, we've pretty much used up all the good explosives. I'm down to using harsh language. Felix was lounging in one of the few chairs that wasn't buried under a mountain of junk, a carefree grin on his face. I don't know what you guys are worried about. We've got a ship that flies, a barely plausible plan, and more luck than sense. What could go wrong? Voss snorted. Everything. Absolutely everything. Optimism, Voss, Calder chided gently. It's like duct tape, surrounds you with a false sense of security. Voss shot him a look that could wilt a cactus. I'd rather be secured by an airlock. Zephyrian 1 and 2, standing aloof in the corner, exchanged glances filled with the kind of disdain usually reserved for a cockroach found in your cereal. Their ability to manipulate weather had been a game changer until it wasn't. Now, they were more like a cosmic joke that had run its course. Earth is doomed, Zephyrian 1 intoned, voice dripping with scorn. Your leaders are ineffective, your technology is primitive, and yet you persist. Yeah, well, Calder replied, we're resilient like that and stubborn. Don't forget stubborn. And desperate, Felix chimed in, raising his hand as if in a class. Can't forget desperate. Max slammed his data pad down with a frustrated sigh. The Zephyrians have jacked up their defenses. We won't break in again, not without some serious firepower or divine intervention, neither of which we have. Why do we even bother? Ilona asked, voice tinged with the fatigue of long battles and longer nights. Is there a point to all this? Calder looked at her, seeing his own doubts mirrored back. The truth was, he didn't have all the answers. Hell, he barely had any. But he had to keep them moving forward, even if it was into the jaws of a cosmic bear trap. We bother because it's what we do, Calder said, leaning back against a table that creaked ominously under his weight. And because if we don't, no one else will. That's the spirit, Felix said, raising an imaginary glass. To fighting the unbeatable foe. And losing with style. They all chuckled at that, a grim kind of laughter that acknowledged the absurdity of their plight. Outside, another bolt of lightning cut through the sky, illuminating the world in stark white relief. The storm may have been losing its fury, but it left behind a landscape battered and bruised. What's the plan, then? Voss asked, arms crossed like a bouncer at a club with no patience for nonsense. We need a new angle, Calder admitted, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Something they won't expect, something reckless and stupid enough to work. Max leaned back in his chair, a manic gleam in his eyes. How about we use Earth's unpredictability? Ironically, the one thing they can't control. Go on, Calder encouraged, gesturing for him to continue. Well, Max said, warming to his theme, if we can't breach their defenses directly, maybe we can trick them into opening up, like turning their own chaos against them. Interesting, Ilona mused, tapping her chin. Use the weather patterns to mask our approach. Make it look like a natural phenomenon. And when they come to investigate, Voss added, catching on, we slip through the back door. Calder nodded slowly, the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. It was risky, sure, but risk was their currency and they were all but broke. We'd need precise timing and coordination. One wrong move and we're toast. Toast, Felix repeated with a grin. I prefer to think of it as well done. Zephyrian 2, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Your chances are slim, but not impossible. That's the best news I've heard all day, Calder quipped. All right, let's get to it. Max, work on the simulations. Ilona, see what surprises we can still muster. Felix, get the ship prepped. And Voss, I need you to keep us in line. Roger that, Voss said, her expression a mix of determination and something almost like hope. Calder watched them disperse, each diving into their tasks like drowning men grasping at straws. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. The hours ticked by, the lab a cacophony of focused activity and the odd curse word as equipment refused to cooperate. Calder found himself standing at a window, watching the remnants of the storm roll across the horizon. It was a reminder of what was at stake, a planet teetering on the brink. "Deep thoughts?" Felix asked, joining him with a mug of something that might have once been coffee. "Just wondering if we're all crazy," Calder admitted, accepting the mug gratefully. "Crazy's the only thing keeping us sane," Felix replied with a shrug. "Besides, we've got a good team. A motley crew, sure, but good." Calder chuckled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the questionable beverage. A team of lunatics trying to save a world. What could be more human than that? "Nothing," Felix replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "Absolutely nothing." As the day wore on, a hesitant calm settled over the lab. Plans were finalized, simulations run, and preparations made. It wasn't a perfect plan, far from it, but it was something, and something was infinitely better than nothing. "All right, everyone," Calder announced, drawing the team back together. "This is it. One last shot at sticking it to the Zephyrians. Let's make it count." Ilona strapped on the last of her gear, a fierce grin on her face. "Let's give him hell." Voss nodded, her eyes reflecting the steel of her resolve. "We'll show them what humans are made of." Max and Felix exchanged a fist bump, their shared smile a testament to their camaraderie. Even the Zephyrians seemed less aloof, as if acknowledging the shared stakes. With a final nod, Calder led them back to the ship, each step echoing with the certainty of purpose. The engines roared to life, a sound that was both terrifying and exhilarating. They ascended into the skies once more, leaving the battered Earth behind, but carrying its indomitable spirit with them. As they approached the Zephyrian base, the tension was palpable, a living thing that coiled around them like a serpent. Every sensor was primed, every eye focused, every heart beating in a wild symphony of nerves and hope. "Max," Calder said over the comms, "you ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Max replied, his voice steady despite the situation. "Then let's dance," Calder said, feeling the rush of adrenaline kick in. Max triggered the sequence and the ship plunged into the storm, Earth's chaos shrouding them like a protective cloak. The Zephyrians wouldn't know what hit them, not until it was too late. It was a gamble, but they were all in. As the plan unfolded, Calder felt a surge of pride in his team. They were flawed, irreverent, and downright human, and that was exactly what made them unstoppable. Against all odds, they had turned the tide, if only for a moment. "Entry point open," Max announced, triumph in his voice. "We're in." The ship slipped past the Zephyrian defenses, a ghost in the machine, a spark in the dark. They had done it, defied the odds once more, and even if it was the last thing they ever did, it was enough. As they reached the heart of the base, the ship hovered, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Calder took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders, and promised himself that whatever happened next, they'd go down fighting. "Let's give them a show to remember," he said, his voice a rallying cry. And with that, they launched into the fray, humanity's last stand against a universe that seemed determined to bury them. But then again, humans had a way of thriving in the impossible, didn't they? Oswin Calder stood amidst the organized chaos of his lab, staring at the screens flickering like a malfunctioning nightclub light. Earth's weather data scrolled by, each line more apocalyptic than the last. Cyclones, electric storms, the occasional hail the size of hyperinflated melons, dogged reminders that Mother Nature was on a bender and Earth was the unwilling party host. "Maybe it's not all bad news," Oswin muttered, a half-baked idea sparking in his mind like a faulty circuit. "If only we could use this chaos." Felix sauntered over, sipping something that might have once been coffee, but now tasted like regret. "What's up, Doc? You look like you've seen a ghost, or worse, an unpaid bill." Oswin snapped his fingers, trying to piece his thoughts together. "The weather. It's unpredictable, right? Even the Zephyrians can't control it entirely." "Yeah, it's a real party trick," Felix said, leaning against a desk cluttered with gadgets that had long since given up their will to function. "What's your point? What if we could harness it? Use Earth's natural unpredictability to disrupt their control." Oswin ventured, his eyes shining with a mad scientist's fervor. Felix raised an eyebrow, skepticism woven into every line of his face. You think we can weaponize the weather? What are we, superheroes now? I left my cape at home. Not exactly, Oswin replied. But if we can simulate a storm surge or a lightning strike at the right moment, we could short-circuit their defenses. It's risky, but it might just work. Risky. Felix chuckled darkly. You had me at might just work. Let's roll the dice. Oswin turned to where the rest of the team was, each engaged in their tasks with an intensity that belied their casual sarcasm. All right, everyone, listen up. I've got a plan. Ilona looked up from her armory, her expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. This better involve something that goes boom. Otherwise, I'm out. Funny you should mention that, Oswin said, rubbing his hands together. We're going to give the Zephyrians a taste of Earth's finest chaos. Voss, who'd been quietly frowning at a map that looked more like a Jackson Pollock painting, glanced over. Chaos. You mean the same chaos that's been kicking our asses? Exactly, Oswin nodded. But this time we'll be in the driver's seat. Max, ever the realist, adjusted his glasses as he peered at the data pad. You're talking about coordinating a natural disaster. Do you have any idea how crazy that sounds? Oswin grinned, a wicked glint in his eyes. Crazy's what we do best, remember? Felix clapped his hands, a gleam of mischief in his eyes. I'm in. Let's show those alien bastards what Earth can really do. Calder turned, finding their captain lurking like a storm cloud with eyebrows. Voss, think you can handle navigating through that? Voss shrugged, the corner of her mouth twitching into something that might have been a smile if you squinted real hard. If I can fly through a bar fight, I can fly through this. Perfect. Oswin felt a wave of relief wash over him. Then let's get to work. We synchronize our approach with the next storm cycle. Max, I need simulations up and running. Ilona, prep whatever explosives you've got left. Felix, make sure the ship systems can handle it. And Voss, get us a trajectory that won't end with us being a smudge on the radar. Aye, aye, Captain, Voss replied, with just enough sarcasm to fill a space freighter. As the team scattered to their respective tasks, Oswin turned back to his console, his fingers dancing over the keys like a pianist on speed. The plan was insane, borderline suicidal, but it was all they had. And in the grand tradition of humanity, they'd either go out in a blaze of glory or make history in the most reckless manner possible. Zephyrian 1 and 2, meanwhile, were watching the proceedings with expressions ranging from mild disdain to utter contempt. They had the look of intergalactic tourists who'd booked a luxury cruise and ended up on a pirate ship instead. You humans are nothing if not persistent, Zephyrian 1 intoned, his voice a rich blend of condescension and something almost like admiration. Stubborn, Oswin corrected, not looking up, and possibly insane, possibly. Zephyrian 2 remarked, the corners of his mouth twitching in what could generously be called a smile. Definitely, Oswin conceded, his focus unwavering. But that's why we're going to win. The hours ticked by, each second a small eternity as they prepped for what could very well be their last stand. The storm outside had grown, a brooding mass of clouds and fury, mirroring the team's own determination. Everything set, Max announced, his voice tinged with the excitement of impending doom. We're ready when you are. Calder gathered them one last time, his gaze sweeping over each of them with the gravity of a man prepared for the final act in a tragic play. This is it, folks. We're betting everything on this one shot. Let's make it count. Ilona slapped a fresh magazine into her weapon with a resounding click. Here's to beating the unbeatable, one explosion at a time. Let's hope they like surprises, Voss added, adjusting the ship's controls with a practiced hand. Felix, ever the optimist, flashed a grin that was all teeth and bravado. If we pull this off, first round's on me. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Oswin cautioned, though his smile betrayed his own brand of optimism. We've got a storm to ride. With that, they boarded the ship, each taking their place for what might be the final mission. The engines roared to life, a sound that was both terrifying and exhilarating, much like standing at the edge of a cliff and contemplating the jump. "Hold on tight," Voss called out, her voice steady as she guided them into the storm's waiting arms. The ship lurched and groaned, a testament to the insanity of their endeavor. Outside, lightning danced across the sky, a chaotic ballet of nature's fury. The ship trembled under the onslaught, but Voss held firm, navigating through the tempest with the skill of a conductor leading a symphony of destruction. "Entry point in sight," Max announced, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. "Brace yourselves." As they hurtled toward the Zephyrian stronghold, Oswin felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind that only came from doing something incredibly reckless and slightly stupid. But it was tempered by hope, a desperate, fragile hope. "Now or never, folks," Calder said, his voice a rallying cry. "Go big or go home," Felix added, his grin unwavering even as the ship shuddered around them. The storm was both ally and adversary, a wild card in their gambit. But as they breached the perimeter, Oswin knew they'd struck the right chord. The Zephyrians' defenses wavered, caught off guard by the sheer audacity of the approach. "We're in," Max confirmed, triumph gleaming in his eyes. "Let's show them what we've got." The team sprang into action, a well-oiled machine running on sheer determination and caffeine. Ilona's explosives carved a path, a symphony of chaos that spoke the universal language of destruction. Zephyrian 1 and 2 hung back, their disdain replaced by something eerily close to respect. "You humans are fascinating creatures," Zephyrian 1 observed. "Fascinatingly stubborn," Zephyrian 2 corrected, though there was no malice in his words. Oswin grinned, adrenaline coursing through his veins like liquid fire. "That's the idea." As they pressed onward, the realization hit Oswin like a freight train. They were actually doing it. Against all odds, they were holding their own. "Don't look now, but I think we're winning," Felix called out, his voice a beacon of misplaced confidence. "Don't jinx it," Voss warned, though her hands never wavered on the controls. The Zephyrian base was a hive of activity, their forces scrambling to repel the unexpected assault. But the storm was on their side, an agent of chaos that twisted and turned, confounding the enemy at every step. "We're not out of this yet," Calder reminded them, his gaze steely and resolute. "But we're in," Ilona countered, her voice laced with defiance. "And we're not backing down." As they neared the heart of the base, the final stage of their plan loomed like a shadow on the horizon. It was do or die, and they were determined to do. "Ready the final charge," Oswin instructed, his heart pounding in his chest like a runaway train. Felix nodded, the grin never leaving his face. "Let's give them a goodbye they won't forget." The team moved with the precision born of desperation, each step a calculated risk in the grand chess game of survival. The Zephyrians were formidable, but they lacked the one thing the humans had in spades, the sheer audacity to defy the impossible. "Final approach," Voss reported, her voice calm in the storm they'd unleashed. Oswin took a deep breath, the enormity of their gamble settling over him like a shroud. But there was no room for doubt, no time for hesitation. With a nod, the final charge was set, a beacon of defiance in the heart of enemy territory. It was a gamble, but in a universe that thrived on chaos, it was their best chance. "Let's make history," Calder whispered, his voice barely audible over the din. With a final, defiant cry, they pressed the trigger, unleashing the storm's fury in one last desperate play. The Zephyrian base shuddered, caught in the eye of the tempest they'd conjured, a testament to human ingenuity and foolishness. And as the dust settled, Oswin couldn't help but laugh, a sound both triumphant and bittersweet. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Against all odds, they had made their mark. In the heart of the storm, they had found their strength. And as the echoes of their victory faded, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, with the same reckless determination that had brought them this far. After all, if humanity was anything, it was unpredictable. And that was their greatest weapon of all. The air inside the ship was thicker than a politician's promise, filled with the electric anticipation of their half-cocked plan. Oswin couldn't help but marvel at their own audacity. After all, it wasn't every day you found yourself slap-bang in the middle of a cosmic pissing contest, with only a tattered blueprint and a prayer thinner than your last paycheck. "Can you feel that?" Ilona murmured, her fingers dancing over her explosives like a pianist tickling the ivories. "That's the feeling of destiny calling," Felix snorted, giving her an incredulous look. "Unless destiny's also calling with a double-barreled shotgun, I'm not interested." Max was hunched over his console, eyes glued to the screen as if it might suddenly sprout legs and do a jig. "If we're lucky, the Zephyrians will be too busy underestimating us to notice we're about to kick their green asses to the curb. Luck's for the gamblers," Voss said dryly, her gaze fixed on the swirling chaos outside. "We're just betting on the house with a busted flush." "Ah, the team." Oswin looked at them with a mix of pride and disbelief. A more ragtag bunch of misfits you couldn't find if you tried. And yet here they were, about to give the Zephyrians a lesson in human ingenuity, or human stupidity. The jury was still out. As they approached the Zephyrian base, the storm raged with all the subtlety of a toddler in a tantrum. Lightning cracked like nature's own laser light show, a terrifying dance that set the hairs on the back of their necks to attention. "Time to play our hand," Calder announced, the grim determination in his voice slightly undercut by the fact that he looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon whole. "All systems ready, ready as they'll ever be," Max replied, though his expression suggested he might rather be anywhere else, perhaps dodging space traffic on a busy interstellar highway. Oswin activated the controls, and the ship lurched forward with all the grace of a drunk trying to dance the Macarena. They were in the thick of it now, with the Zephyrians' defenses looming closer, a nightmare vision of alien architecture that would give a Lovecraftian horror pause. "Remember, we're counting on the weather to do half the work," Oswin shouted over the din. "Let nature show them what unpredictability really looks like. Are we sure it's not just going to show us what a bad day feels like?" Felix quipped, though his hands moved with practiced ease over his console. Ilona was already planting charges with a deftness that spoke of years spent making things go boom. She grinned, a wild look in her eyes. "I love the smell of explosives in the morning." Smells like potential. The Zephyrians hadn't been expecting an attack like this. Their defensive systems were state-of-the-art, sure, but they hadn't accounted for the element of surprise mixed with a hefty dose of human unpredictability, an explosive cocktail all its own. "Systems are glitching," Max announced, a mixture of satisfaction and dread in his voice. "Looks like their fancy tech doesn't know how to dance in the rain." "Good," Calder replied, his voice carrying a gravitas that suggested this was all part of some grand plan, even if it was mostly improvised on a hope and a prayer. "Let's keep them guessing." Voss swerved the ship with the practiced hand of someone who had spent more time in bar brawls than in flight simulators. "All right, everyone. Hold on to your butts." And hold on they did, as the ship swooped and dived through the maelstrom of alien and natural chaos. It was a roller coaster designed by someone who had a serious grudge against human life expectancy. Zephyrian 1 watched from the sidelines, his expression a masterpiece of disdain mixed with something akin to reluctant respect. "You humans certainly have a flair for the dramatic." "Flair's one way to put it," Oswin shouted back, trying not to bite his tongue as the ship bucked like a wild stallion. Zephyrian 2, less scornful but just as bemused, added, "It's almost like you enjoy the chaos." "Enjoy's a strong word," Oswin replied, his mind racing as they neared the center of the storm. "We're more accustomed to it. Misery loves company," Ilona said, tossing another explosive with the nonchalance of someone flicking a cigarette butt. "And we're bringing the whole party." The ship's systems flickered, the screens a kaleidoscope of warnings and errors that Max was valiantly trying to ignore. "We're breaching their defenses," he reported, a hint of awe in his voice. "I think we're actually doing it." "Of course we're doing it." Felix grinned, though his hands were shaking slightly. Who else is crazy enough to try? As they pressed on, the Zephyrians scrambled to respond, their forces disoriented by the storm and their technology faltering like a computer trying to run on dial-up in a fiber-optic world. It was beautiful in a way, watching the mighty brought low by the very elements they thought they'd mastered. Almost there, Calder said, and Oswin was struck by how much he sounded like a general leading a charge, rather than a scientist trying not to lose his lunch in a turbulent spaceship. The final approach was a blur of activity, each member of the team working in perfect, if chaotic, synchronicity. Ilona's explosives created openings, Max's tech wizardry kept their systems from imploding, and Felix's sharp wit kept morale from nosediving like a lead balloon. "We're in the eye now," Voss reported, her eyes scanning the screens with laser focus. "Let's make it count. Final charge ready?" Oswin asked, his voice steady despite everything. This was the moment they'd been building toward, the culmination of all their reckless plans and caffeine-fueled brainstorming sessions. "Ready?" Ilona confirmed, her thumb hovering over the detonator like she was a kid with a new toy and no adult supervision. "I can't believe it, but we're actually going to do this." "Believe it," Max replied, his eyes never leaving his screen. "And if we survive, drinks are on Felix." "Gladly," Felix said, though there was a tremor in his voice that spoke of the tension strumming through all of them. "I'll buy the whole damn bar if we pull this off." The charge went off with a deafening roar, a shockwave that rattled their teeth and set every alarm howling in protest. The Zephyrian base trembled, caught in the perfect storm of human ingenuity and nature's fury. "We did it," Max breathed, disbelief and triumph mingling in his voice. "I can't believe we actually did it." "Believe it," Calder said, a rare smile breaking through his usual stoicism. "We've just given them a taste of what Earth can do." Oswin laughed, a wild, exhilarating sound that mingled with the ship's alarms and the dying echo of the explosion. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd turned the tide. In the aftermath, the ship limped away from the wreckage, a battered but victorious survivor in the storm's aftermath. The Zephyrians wouldn't soon forget this lesson in human tenacity. Zephyrian 1 and 2 exchanged a glance, their disdain replaced by an emotion that might have been respect, or at least the alien equivalent of a grudging nod. "You humans are full of surprises," Zephyrian 1 said, his tone less condescending than before. Oswin shrugged, a grin still plastered on his face. "We like to keep things interesting and unpredictable," Zephyrian 2 added, a hint of something like amusement in his voice. "Unpredictability our specialty," Voss replied, steering them through the remnants of the storm with ease. And we're just getting started. As the team settled into the post-battle calm, a sense of camaraderie settled over them like a comforting blanket. They'd pulled off the impossible, and though the future was uncertain, they knew they could face it together. "Here's to us," Ilona said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to making history," to history, Felix agreed, his grin wide and genuine. "And to doing it our way." They'd survived the storm, and in doing so, they'd carved out a new path, one that promised more challenges, more chaos, and hopefully more victories. But for now, they'd take a moment to savor this triumph, to rest and regroup before whatever came next. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that, in the universe's grand scheme, they were more than just players. They were wild cards, ready to upend the game whenever they chose. And as they flew away from the wreckage, leaving the Zephyrians to ponder their defeat, Oswin knew that whatever lay ahead, they'd meet it head-on, with the same reckless determination and irreverent spirit that had brought them this far. After all, if humanity was anything, it was persistent. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The storm had finally quieted to a whisper, leaving the remnants of the Zephyrian base sprawled across the landscape like the aftermath of a frat party, where all the attendees were physics majors with a penchant for explosives. Earth's leaders, in their infinite wisdom, were now scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. Meanwhile, in the relative safety of Dr. Oswin Calder's lab, The mood was a curious mix of elation and disbelief, the kind you'd expect after surviving a night of heavy drinking with your liver still intact. "Well, that wasn't the worst plan we've ever had," Voss remarked, her face a blend of satisfaction and the kind of casual menace that suggested she was imagining the Zephyrians as a new dartboard. "No, I think that honor still goes to our idea of using a meteor as a battering ram," Felix chimed in, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he leaned back in his chair, the tension of the battle still humming through his veins. Oswin, ever the scientist, was already engrossed in examining data on the aftermath, his eyes flicking over screens with a keen intensity. "Turns out chaos can be pretty damn useful," he mused, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Ilona, who was absently toying with a detonator, an act that made everyone just a tad nervous, chuckled darkly. "Chaos and explosions, my two favorite things." Max, still glued to his console, couldn't help but smile at the thought. "We should start a consultancy. Earth's Chaos Division, unpredictable solutions for predictable problems," Catchy Voss said, raising an imaginary glass. "Here's to unpredictability. If nothing else, it keeps life interesting." "Interesting's one word for it," Oswin replied dryly, glancing up from his mess of a workspace. "And here I thought science would be boring. You'd be out of a job if it was," Felix pointed out, his grin widening. "Besides, you love this kind of madness." "Don't lie," Ilona added, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "You've got chaos junkie written all over you." Oswin snorted and turned back to his data. "I prefer spontaneity enthusiast." The banter was light, but beneath it lay the heavy realization that they'd just pulled off what many had thought impossible. The Zephyrians, with all their advanced technology and smug superiority, had been beaten by a group of humans with nothing but determination and the world's worst weather forecast. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth's leaders finally seemed to realize the potential of their planet's chaotic climate. Perhaps there was something to be said for the sheer unpredictability of nature, a force that even the most advanced alien technology couldn't fully harness. "Who'd have thought Earth's weather would be our saving grace?" Oswin mused, shaking his head. "All this time we've been cursing it, and now it's our biggest asset." Max chuckled, his fingers still dancing over the console. "Guess it's true what they say. It's not the size of your arsenal but how you use it." "I think that's a different kind of arsenal," Ilona said, laughing. "But I get your point." As they spoke, a message came through from Earth Coalition headquarters, the words appearing on the screen with all the grace of a bureaucratic slap in the face. "Congratulations on your victory," the message read. "The assistance of your team in repelling the Zephyrian incursion is duly noted. We are reviewing strategies for future defense utilizing Earth's natural assets." "Duly noted, huh?" Voss muttered, rolling her eyes. "For all we did, I'd appreciate a little more enthusiasm." Felix threw up his hands in mock protest. "We save the world and all we get is a duly noted. What does a guy gotta do to get a fruit basket around here?" Oswin shook his head, a bemused expression on his face. "Bureaucracy at its finest. They can't even muster a proper thank you without sounding like a committee meeting." "Hey, I'll take it," Max said. "Could have been worse. They could have forgotten us entirely." "That's next week's oversight," Ilona quipped with a smirk. "They'll have forgotten us by the time the paperwork's done." Oswin leaned back, surveying his chaotic lab with something resembling pride. "Paperwork or not, we did it. And next time the Zephyrians come knocking, we'll be ready." Voss nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We've got our work cut out, though. If we're going to keep Earth off the galactic menu, we need more than just luck and a storm. We need a plan, more plans." Felix groaned, slumping theatrically. "I'm still recovering from this one." "Plans are easy," Ilona said with a glint in her eye. "It's sticking to them that's the hard part." "Maybe we don't need to stick to them," Max suggested, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe we just need to keep being unpredictable. Catch them off guard every time." Oswin smiled, nodding. "Sounds like a plan to me." Unpredictability is our best weapon. The team lapsed into a comfortable silence, each member lost in their thoughts. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. They'd proven that humanity could stand up to the Zephyrians, but it was clear that this was just the beginning. "You know, it's kind of poetic," Voss said quietly, her voice breaking the silence. "We've spent so long fighting the weather, and now it's fighting for us. Maybe it's always been on our side," Max mused, a faint smile playing on his lips. "We just didn't know it. Or maybe it just hates the Zephyrians more than it hates us," Felix added with a chuckle. "I mean, that's gotta count for something, right?" Oswin looked around at his team, a motley crew of misfits who'd somehow pulled off the impossible. They were tired, battered, and slightly insane, but they were still here, still fighting. "Whatever the case, we're not done yet," he said, his voice ringing with determination. "This was just one battle. We've got a whole war to win." Voss nodded, her eyes fierce. "And we'll win it. Whatever it takes." Ilona raised her imaginary glass again, her smile wicked and wild. "To chaos and kicking alien ass to us," Max said, echoing her gesture. "And to doing it our way," Felix grinned, raising his own invisible toast. "Here's to the underdogs." As they clinked their imaginary glasses, a new sense of resolve settled over the team. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters, and they'd keep fighting until the Zephyrians learned to leave Earth well enough alone. Outside, the storm clouds were beginning to clear, the sun peeking through with tentative optimism. It was a new day, and though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The world might be a chaotic mess, but it was their chaotic mess, and they'd defend it with everything they had. After all, if there was one thing humans were good at, it was turning the tables when the odds were stacked against them. And as the team sat together, united in their shared victory and determination, Oswin knew that whatever lay ahead, they'd meet it head-on, armed with the most unpredictable weapon of all: human tenacity. So here's to chaos, to unpredictability, and to the motley crew that had just proven that sometimes the best way to face the future was with a grin on your face and a middle finger in the air. Because in the grand scheme of things, that's what being human was all about. When the last of the sun's rays filtered through the remnants of the storm, casting an orange glow across the debris-strewn landscape, the team was already preparing for their next move. They'd accomplished the impossible and made history. "Hey, Oswin," Felix said, a lopsided grin on his face as he stood. "You ever think about going into politics?" "I hear saviors of the planet have a pretty good shot." Oswin laughed, the sound echoing in the lab. "No thanks. I've got enough chaos in my life without adding politics to it." "Well, if you change your mind, I'll vote for you," Max said, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "Anyone who can outsmart an alien invasion deserves a shot." "We'll see," Oswin replied, a glint of humor in his eyes. "For now, I think I'll stick to what I know best, blowing things up," Ilona suggested with a smirk. "Exactly," Oswin agreed. "But maybe next time we can do it without nearly getting fried by lightning. Where's the fun in that?" Voss countered, her expression one of mock disappointment. "Besides, you know you love it." Oswin couldn't help but laugh, shaking his head. "Maybe I do. Maybe I've just got a thing for chaos." "Don't we all?" Felix said, clapping him on the back. "It's what makes life interesting, right?" "Interesting," Oswin echoed, nodding. "Yeah, I guess it does." As the team continued their preparations, Earth's leaders began to realize that they had more than just a victory on their hands. They had a blueprint for future defense, one that capitalized on the very unpredictability that had plagued them for so long. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And in the grand scheme of things, that was all they needed. A start, a chance, and a team that refused to back down. Because if there was one thing humanity was good at, it was taking a punch and getting back up again. They might not always have the best technology or the smartest strategies, but they had heart. And sometimes that was enough. So here's to humanity, to chaos, and to the unpredictable journey ahead. Whatever happens, they'd meet it together, with the same reckless determination and irreverent spirit that had brought them this far. And as they prepared for whatever lay ahead, Oswin knew that they were ready. because in a universe of uncertainty, they'd proven that sometimes the best way to win was to embrace the chaos and ride it to victory.